I'm Johnny Dorminy, and today I will perform the Secret Christmas Trip to the White House, Debate and Diplomacy at the Arcadia Conference. The Pearl Harbor attack of December 7, 1941 thrust the United States into World War II. Within a week, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was on his way to the United States for the first wartime conference. The most important topics for discussion was whether or not the United States would stick to its pre-war agreement of fighting in Europe first, and how the two nations' militaries would work together and with other allies. Although the conference started with suspicions running high on both sides, through debate and diplomacy, the Americans and British set aside their distrust and laid down the groundwork for fighting a global war. We joined British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to hear his view of debate and diplomacy in the White House. It is hard to believe that my time lodging here in the Blue Room at the White House is coming to an end. Just 6 weeks ago, Japan brutally attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor and pulled her into this war. At the time, it seemed likely that the United States would go after Japan and forget her earlier promise to Great Britain of fighting in Europe first. So at once, I demanded this meeting here in Washington, and even my cabinet thought I was a bit pushy compared to how deferential we've been before. Well, I told them that was how we spoke to her when we were wooing her. Now that she is in the harem, we speak much differently. I will never forget the image of Washington as we flew in on December 22nd. It had been 5 years since we'd seen an illuminated city at night. In the words of my bodyguard, Tommy Thompson, those of us in the plane were transfixed by the spectacle. Washington represented freedom, hope, and strength. Upon arrival at the White House, we were greatly relieved to find that the United States maintained its desire to fight in Europe first, now to plan the war and celebrate Christmas. On Christmas Eve, President Roosevelt and I gave a heartfelt address to the freedom-loving peoples of the world as we lit the White House tree. We each encouraged our people to celebrate this day with peace in their hearts and to give this day to the children whose freedom hangs in the balance. On Christmas morning, our entire party made its way to the Methodist Church before feasting on a White House dinner of oysters and plum pudding. Then back to work. In the Christmas afternoon meeting, American Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall introduced the topic of unified command. In Marshall's view, a combined board would take direction from the American President and the British Prime Minister, yours truly, and give orders to all nations' forces in an area. I was not inclined to agree. This would put America and Britain as equals. Britain had been fighting Nazi Germany for 3 years, whereas the United States had just declared war on, the 14th? However, personal diplomacy edged itself in. Although President Roosevelt and I have only had 2 opportunities to visit together, we have become great friends. I am more inclined to trust him, and he me, than any other world leader. He even wheeled himself into my bedroom unannounced when I was working on a speech right after I'd taken my bath. What a sight I was to behold in all my pink nakedness! Oh. Roosevelt convinced me that unity of command was a very important topic and that we should pursue it to the end of the war. Although the Allies had agreed upon a structure for combined operations with the creation of the Combined Chiefs of Staff, the CCS, there was still much debate over its jurisdiction. Meanwhile, Churchill still held out hope that the British could lead the CCS and thus the war effort. We joined American Army Air Force's General Henry Hap Arnold to understand the American perspective. On January 8th, Churchill had the British Chiefs of Staff introduce a position paper outlining British ideas for post-Arcadia collaboration. First, Churchill wanted a personal representative to have contacts with such authorities on the highest level as to be arranged with the President. Essentially, Churchill wanted direct access to important military leaders and the President, in effect bypassing the CCS. Secondly, and more explosively, Churchill wanted there to be 2 combined allocation committees, one in Washington and one in London. No, sir. These provisions were direct challenges to the hard-fought concept of the CCS as the highest military planning body for the war. In General Marshall's view, the combined Chiefs of Staff would take overall political direction from the American President and the British Prime Minister. Meanwhile, the CCS would set objectives for each theater, work with theater commanders, coordinate between theaters, and oversee the distribution of war materiel. Inserting a Brit between the CCS and the President would allow Churchill to ruin the American chain of command. The British and American chiefs met to discuss Churchill's paper yesterday, January 13th. We Americans were generally opposed to Churchill's personal representative. However, if the representative were part of the British embassy's military mission, then he could have contact with the President and important military leaders, but could not interfere with the CCS. After we agreed on this, the meeting moved on to the allocation committees. Here, General Marshall took a firm stand. He said he did not so much mind there being 2 allocation committees, but that they must be subordinate to the CCS. Many British jaws dropped. It was obvious that this issue would have to be solved between the President and the Prime Minister. When the American delegation met privately the next day, General Marshall told President Roosevelt his concerns about the allocation committees. He said that he, General Marshall, would be unable to fulfill his role as Army Chief of Staff unless the allocation committees were subordinate to the CCS. What could Roosevelt do? If he sided with the British, he would have to fire the man who had arguably done more to prepare the United States for war than anyone else alive. Roosevelt, the man who loved to dodge hard decisions, was forced to take a firm stand. When Roosevelt and Churchill met for the last meeting of the Arcady Conference, Roosevelt proposed there be 2 allocation committees, one in London for raw materials to be independent of the CCS, and one in Washington to be for finished products, which would be subordinate to the CCS. This compromise prevented Marshall from resigning and would hopefully appease the British. The ball was now entirely in Churchill's court. If he refused, all the diplomacy to date could go down the drain. The Anglo-American alliance could be fractured. So, with just hours before he was to depart for England, what could Churchill do but agree? We joined American General and later President Dwight D. Eisenhower to understand the long-term impact of the Arcady Conference. The turning point of the debate over the jurisdiction of the CCS came when General Marshall threatened to resign. If Marshall had not taken his stand, Churchill's position paper might have carried the day. If so, Churchill could have interfered endlessly with the American chain of command and probably doomed the CCS. We would have ended up like the cooperating allies of World War I, who suffered horrific losses because they had no clear international chain of command. Overall, the Arcady Conference was a success. The British achieved their main objective of getting us Americans to fight in Europe first. Meanwhile, we Americans achieved our primary goal of unifying command. The Arcady Conference was diplomacy at its finest, give and take on both sides, founded on the grounds of mutual success. We did have our failures. Although the 1st Theater Command failed in the Pacific, the lessons learned proved essential to later Allied victories in the European and African theaters. Another failure of the Arcady Conference was that there were no plans made for the eventual invasion of mainland Europe. However, these failures pale in comparison to the successes of the CCS and later theater commands. Unfortunately, the debate over unified command came up again when planning the Normandy invasion. I, like General Marshall at the Arcady Conference, threatened to resign unless unity of command was maintained. The North African, Sicilian, and Italian campaigns have proven unity of command to be essential to victory. And once again, unity of command proved indispensable in the ultimate victory of our troops in the European theater. As President Truman said earlier today, by their sacrifice, skill, and courage, they have saved and exalted the cause of freedom throughout the world. The Pearl Harbor attack of December 7, 1941, thrust the United States into World War II. Within a week, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was on his way to the United States for the first wartime conference. Although the conference started with suspicions running high on both sides, through diplomacy and debate, the Americans and British set aside their distrust and laid down the groundwork for fighting a global war. Thank you.